And lastly, the number one worst plant for beginner plant parents is... Howdy friends, welcome back to my channel. My name is Luke, and today we're going over the 5 worst beginner plants, so stay tuned for more. Every time you go to Lowe's or Home Depot and go to the plant section, you always see these little cards that say, great for beginners, totally easy, low light, all this other BS. That, in my opinion, a lot of them are not actually great for beginners. The plants I'm about to go over are obviously, in my opinion, in my experience, early on in my beginner journey, so I'll kind of give you some of the highlights as I go through each plant. But keep in mind, you may have different opinions. That's totally cool. If you want to fight about it in the comments, do so down below. Let's jump right into it. First up, number 5 is the snake plant. And I'm calling it snake plant and not Sansevieria because it was reclassified to Dracaena, and I'm not calling it Dracaena because you'll find out later. But yes, the snake plant. As you can see, mine back here, I'm currently propagating because I killed it when I was a beginner. While yes, they are fairly low maintenance, there are a few reasons why I don't think it's necessarily the best plant for a beginner. And when I say beginners or a beginner, I'm talking like first plant you get, maybe second, third plant you get. While yes, they are easy, here are a few reasons why I think it's not great for a beginner, or at least for your first plant. Number 1, they are very susceptible to overwatering. Part of the beginner plant spiel is, oh, you never have to water it. You just give it some water every month and throw it in a corner, kind of like a ZZ plant. Low light. Well, yes, this is true with snake plants. Typically, when you first get a new plant or when you first start collecting plants, you really want to helicopter parent those plants. You want to be misting them and watering them constantly and tending for them because we tend to feel that's what you have to do, when really most plants want to be left alone. Just watered occasionally, left alone otherwise. So that's why I feel a snake plant might be kind of challenging as your first plant because you're gonna overwater it potentially. I, as you saw, overwatered my snake plant, then I kind of freaked out. I didn't water it for a long time after because of it. So I think you'd be better off getting something that can handle overwatering, like a pothos, or maybe like a vining philodendron, something like that, as opposed to a snake plant. Number 4 on my list today is Dracaena. So not the Dracaena, i.e. what used to be called Sansevieria, i.e. snake plant, but the other types of Dracaena. For instance, I've had Dracaena marginata, which I do have one right over there. It's currently dying. I've also had like Dracaena lemon lime. I've had a Dracaena Janet Craig. You see them kind of everywhere at places like Lowe's and Home Depot, and you know, they look fun. They kind of look like mini little Dr. Seuss trees, so they're very enticing as a new beginner plant parent. They're also fairly affordable, so you're like, hey, slap one of those up, ready to go. Unfortunately, in my experience, I cannot get them to grow. I don't know if maybe they prefer to be outside and I'm not giving them enough light, but for me as a beginner plant parent, this was very discouraging having a plant that wasn't really growing. Once again, I'm pretty sure I overwatered it in the beginning. I mean, everybody overwaters like all their plants in the beginning, at least I sure did. They also were pretty susceptible to root rot, so I had, for instance, my lemon lime, the roots rotted out. I replanted it, I was able to salvage it, and they started to slowly grow back, but then there was no growth anywhere else. And yeah, it was just tough. Typically, you'd want to get a plant that grows more quickly. So once again, pothos, easy. That's why it's a great cheap beginner plant in my opinion, because not only can it tolerate underwatering, can also tolerate overwatering to an extent. It also grows fairly quickly on the whole as far as plants go. So I would say Dracaena, not for your first few plants. Maybe once you're a more established plant parent. Number 3 on the list are succulents. So succulents are one of those plants, especially in Southern California, that everybody's like, oh, new to plants, get a succulent. Yes, they're inexpensive. Yes, they're easy to find here at least, but I do not recommend them for beginners. I still don't like caring for succulents because I find them quite challenging. First off, they need way more light than anyone ever talks about. In my experience, they need to be outside with either semi-direct or direct light, really bright light for a lot of succulent varieties. Also, the watering schedule, once again, kind of like with the snake plant, we tend to want to water a lot in the beginning, but succulents really need to dry out in between and sometimes even stay dry for a longer period of time, which makes getting into a rhythm, a watering schedule, if you will, kind of challenging in my opinion. They are easy to propagate, which is nice. That's a benefit because you can usually just pop off one of the leaves, stick it in some soil, or stick it in something and have it grow into a new plant, which is nice. But for the reasons I just listed, unless you have a primarily succulent and cactus garden where your watering schedule is going to be kind of really spread out, or let's say you're traveling a lot and you can't water regularly, or you just aren't a helicopter parent at all, I would say keep them off the plate for now. Number 2 on this list is ivy, like English ivy, for instance. So the first thing I noticed with the English ivy was it was growing really leggy where I had it. So I'm assuming it needs a little bit more light than I was providing at that time, which leggy ivy isn't really the vibe most people are going for. They want kind of compact and flowing down, which I was just not getting that. The second challenge I had with it was it wanted to be moist, more moist than I wanted to keep it in my house. I found it wanted to basically stay wet all of the time, but that also was attracting a ton of fungus gnats. So basically anytime I go near it, they would just fly out of the soil. So it's kind of a breeding ground for the fungus gnats. And then on top of that, it was the first plant I ever had that got spider mites. Almost within a month of having it, it dried up a little bit and then immediately got spider mites. So that was the first plant I ever threw out. I have thrown out a few since, but that was the first one I ever chucked in I actually didn't throw it away in the garbage. I threw it out, and I have like a kind of a semi-compost back there, but just kind of tossed it right out and said, never again. Maybe if you have an outdoor garden where this would be a little more beneficial, or maybe if you can have it grow up a wall somewhere outside, it could be a win, but as far as indoor goes, not for me. And lastly, the number 1 worst plant for beginner plant parents is ficus. I'm going to kind of lump it all together. Ficus, whether it's fiddle leaf fig, whether it's kind of the rubber tree or like Ficus teneki. Any of these I personally think are awful for beginner plant parents. Let me state my case because I know some of you will not agree with me. One of the first plants I got was a fiddle leaf fig. I knew they said it was, it's a little challenging. People kind of downplay how challenging it is. First of all, it needs way more light than most of us can provide in an indoor setting. Unless you have really large south-facing windows or a room with a ton of light, at least in my space, it was just not possible to keep it happy. Second is they're expensive generally. Most people want to get this large established fiddle leaf fig and they're kind of pricey to get. You got to have a lot of space, a lot of light, so they're marketed towards beginners when they definitely should not be. I'm not saying they're bad plants, but they're just not for beginners. Another reason I found is they attract spider mites as well. It's one of the only plants I've had in my collection that got spider mites, and that's why I eventually moved it outside. Another reason, specifically the fiddle leaf fig, but actually also my rubber tree, is they're susceptible to root rot. They really want to dry out completely in between waterings. And typically when you get them, they come in, they're more established, they come in a larger pot. And as a beginner plant parent, it's really challenging to figure out a watering schedule, especially if you don't use some sort of, probe, like moisture probe. It's challenging to figure out when they are really dried all the way out. So inevitably you end up watering it and inevitably it gets root rot. So you went and dropped all this money on this beautiful plant that you can't give enough light and you gave it root rot. All of my ficus at this point are on my back patio. The rubber tree was basically about to die. My kind of burgundy rubber tree was basically about to die. Got root rot, couldn't really salvage it. It's basically dying a slow death on my back patio, unfortunately. The fiddle leaf fig that used to be right over here got spider mites while I was away for a weekend. That plant plus an alocasia I had got spider mites. Everything else seemed to be fine. The teneki is still in a small pot and I have it out back and it's actually doing quite well. It's put out like 3 new leaves over the course of the last, I don't know, maybe 2 months. So that one is, I don't know if I would say thriving, but it's doing much better. I'm not sure if it still has spider mites. I haven't really been treating them, but it hasn't really been hindering the plant. For the fiddle leaf fig, even though now I have treated it for the spider mites, I have it in ample light. It gets a little bit of direct light every day and lots of ambient, bright, indirect light. It still has not grown at all. I hear lots of people say that they have a fiddle leaf fig for like a year before it does anything. So once again, as a beginner plant parent, you want something that's going to grow a lot to kind of keep you engaged, make you excited. Everybody loves a little new growth. So if you have this really expensive plant that's getting pests and not growing at all, it's gonna be a surefire way to make you second guess about being a plant parent. Well, friends, that's all we got today. That's all we got on my opinion for the worst plants for beginner plant parents. What did you think about my list? Did you agree with some of these? All of these or none of these? Let me know in the comments down below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you liked what you saw today, please give it a like down below. Really helps out the channel. Subscribe with the notifications on so you stay in the loop when I post new videos. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you real soon. My girlfriend moved in recently, so we're learning how to film with 2 people living in my apartment. So she's being very gracious and being quiet in between while I'm filming. Hi, baby. Thank you. Yes. Okay.